Obviously, the world of work has changed beyond recognition over the last few weeks. We've got businesses that have been mothballed, staff that have been furloughed, businesses that are carrying on but working from home. For some businesses, that was a really easy transition, and for some, that's meant a massive change in policies and setup and all the rest of it. And the worry is for a lot of businesses that means that some of the compliance issues have got lost along the way. And when we're talking about compliance, what we mean is, are your HR policies still relevant? Are you still GDPR compliant? Is your client data secure? If you've got staff working on home laptops, if your policies didn't account for staff working from home, all of that sort of thing. So it's probably what some people might consider to be the boring bits, but it is actually the stuff that at this time is really compliant, whilst really important, because at the moment, everybody's just focusing on, we need to get our business through this, we've got to find a way to survive. But what we don't want to do is be in a position where there are court cases and tribunals and things down the road, because there's issues that we just didn't think about at this time. So it's aimed at business owners, it's employees, anybody who's got worry about GDPR. If you've been asked to do something as an employee that you don't feel comfortable with, or if as a business you're worrying about that kind of thing, please ask us a question and we will give you our contact details at the end, so you can get in touch with us after the session. So for now, I will introduce the people I've got here with me today. I'll go around. So Vicky, tell us who you are. What's your name and where you come from, please?
Yeah, so thanks very much for having me. So I work for a company called Optimal People Business Services, which is a HR outsource provider. So we manage the whole HR journey, life cycle, from recruiting them in to supporting them in businesses, right through to continuing to support their engagement. We also look at supporting businesses from a project perspective, and that's certainly quite key at this moment in time, looking at how we're going to come out of the back of COVID, and how we're supporting our businesses, develop what that new proposition looks like. Because obviously, what we've talked about before we came on this call, that's all changing. The proposition of how we're going to work going forward changes, and that impacts how we manage, how we engage, and what processes we have in place, and certainly around compliance.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Vicky. Helen, please.
Hi, I'm Helen Christie. I'm a franchisor for a company called Face to Face HR, so I'm a HR consultant also. And so we predominantly work with SMEs I work with across the Northwest, predominantly in Lancashire. I'm providing support for smaller businesses who probably haven't got the resource to have a full-time HR person on site with them. Obviously, that's presented some unique challenges over the last couple of weeks, because smaller businesses have different challenges than bigger businesses. So cash flow has been an issue. Compliance obviously has been an issue in terms of keeping people safe to be in work, or making decisions as to whether to furlough people and not being able to pay them in the run up to the kind of portal being open, that kind of stuff. So yeah, a unique set of challenges in some unique circumstances.
Yeah, I think the HR people that I know have been the busiest, the most run off their feet in the last few weeks. I don't know how you're not all raging alcoholics.
I'd rather have my hair dyed before it happened.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Nick, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Nick Hunter. I'm a performance compliance and data protection consultant. I've generally been working in the area of public safety. It comes from the fact that prior to this, I've been doing it for just over 3 years now. But before that, I did 30 years as a police officer and retired. And obviously now in this world, very much obviously looking at a lot of data protection. Around the time that I sort of set up business, we were just coming into GDPR. So I spent quite a bit of time helping businesses get GDPR compliant. That meant really rejigging and rewriting their procedures, getting all the right documentation out there, setting up the processes, and also doing quite a bit of training. So it really quite a lot to just make sure that businesses are obviously compliant. And now we're all working from home. That's putting on some new strains and tests really to see whether businesses and employers and employees have the right policies, procedures in place to ensure that data is protected as good working from home as it is in the office. And obviously we'll go on to speak about that a bit more.
Absolutely, yeah, we will. Thank you very much. So we've got quite an experienced team, because I was saying as we came live that GDPR and compliance and stuff is not my area of expertise. Hannah, my sister, who's our commercial director, she's in charge of all of that for GrowTraffic. So I tend to leave it all to her, and she gets on with it excellently. So it's not at all something I know a lot about. So I am going to rely on you lot to guide the conversation today, please. So we'll go around again now, please. My next question to you all. Just tell me a little bit more about the situation that you're finding yourself in, and in terms of your own business, what are some of the challenges that you've come across or faced or overcome over the last kind of period? So we'll go in reverse order. Nick, I'll come to you first this time, please.
Okay. In reality, because I'm a sole trader, sole consultant, I work from home. So there are times that I obviously go into offices and go in to deliver training, actually go in to do a deep dive into people's procedures and policies to make sure that they've got that all in there. That aspect of work is obviously not actually happening, but the remote working for myself is quite simple, really. I mean, one of the things I'll talk about a bit later when I'm talking about some of the problems with working from home is I have two sort of different strings. I've got two laptops. I've got one that's actually for a company I consult to, so I'm working on their network, which is obviously a lot safer than my other home laptop, which I then actually do most of my other business on. But I'll go into a bit more depth when we talk about some of the issues around that. But for me, not massive changes really, except for the fact that I'm not getting out and about. And obviously at the moment, any training, which I haven't done since the lockdown, would have to be sort of be virtual as opposed to face to face.
And so are you finding with your business now then, if you're not able to kind of get into businesses, I presume your starting point would be kind of be an audit of where they're at now. I presume, are you not able to onboard clients and do that, start that process with them if people aren't in their offices or wherever?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it a lot harder, really. I suppose it's one of those where when you're sort of out there and about, you sort of word of mouth seems to spread work quite well. But now there's sort of this lockdown, people are really thinking about other things. And in reality, one of the things they should really be thinking about is what I do actually consult on, and that's data protection and making sure that people are compliant. Because there are legal implications, obviously, on GDPR, and what can happen is in these situations, which I think is pretty unique to all of us. We've never been in this situation before. That people almost feel as though there's a relaxation on how people can work at home, and on the back of that, it might actually be that people are doing some things that they shouldn't be doing. And it's really important that we make sure that those aspects are right, because you've got the same duty of making sure data is protected at home as you have in the office. But for actually looking for clients and things like that, I suppose I'm quite lucky that I've got a base of things that I can be doing, and I'm not actively really making that seeking effort at the moment, because I think there's a lot of firms that have got other things on their plates. But obviously I'm always here to give advice for any employers or employees that may want that.
I think that's the worry though, isn't it? Because you're right. I mean, as I said at the beginning, everybody has got bigger, more important things on the plate. You know, we're all just panicking about, are we going to pay the wage bill and how are we going to keep the rent covered and stuff. But in reality, this has actually never been more applicable, because when we're all in the office, we're sort of all covered and we're all safer, whereas now we're all dotted around at different places, different locations, different counties, even in GrowTraffic's case. In a way, it is more important now, but you're right. I mean, it's like with marketing, we're one of the first things to go and the last things to be taken back on again. So it's that tricky situation, isn't it? But thank you, Nick. As you say, we'll come back to those home working issues, definitely. Yeah. Helen, what about you?
I think probably the biggest challenge for me is my branding is face-to-face HR, which is a bit difficult at the moment. It has meant a bit of a challenge for me. I don't normally work from home. I normally work from an office, same as you, Rachel. So it's been, my retained clients are kind of spread across the Northwest, so it's presented a bit of a challenge in terms of the normal service that I would provide, which are things like quarterly reviews where I go onto site and I have a couple of hours with the client understanding their issues, because I do tend to get far more out of them face to face than I do kind of on the phone, really. So moving to video call has helped with that to some extent, but again, it's not everybody's comfortable with it. It's still not quite as good as being, you don't pick up the same kind of nuances from people's body language and things from being on a video call with them as opposed to sat in a room with them. I think from a compliance point of view, some of the stuff that Nick was just saying in terms of data protection and talking to people over video call and having to send a lot more documents out via email than I would normally do, is a problem. I did an appeal hearing by Zoom last week, which was unusual and a bit difficult. I spent most of the session looking up the employee's nose because he was doing it on his mobile phone. So there are some interesting challenges, really, that I think it's just and I'm sure Vicky will back me up on this in a second. Even just remaining on top of the government guidelines and the Treasury direction, it's difficult because A, they contradict each other, and B, they change every 2 minutes. Usually on a Friday night after we've all turned our computers off, just looking the updates. So yeah, that's particularly challenging. I think I had drafted a little introduction. I didn't say it at the beginning, but I've got 20 years experience in HR and about 5 weeks experience in crisis management in a pandemic, which I guess is probably as much as anybody else, really. So those are just the kind of challenges that we're all facing, I think.
I think you're right, though. I mean, there's every HR person, I keep saying, every HR person I've spoken to, there is only 3 of you, and 2 of them. But all of you have kind of consistently been saying that this is such an unknown quantity, and that the advice is changing. You were advising people 3 weeks ago on what they needed to do for furlough, and then the rules were being updated and the regulations were coming out, and as more clarification came out, the danger is that some businesses have done it wrong, and then you get in, you've got to correct what you've done, and otherwise you end up again in tribunals further down the line. So I think that's...
I think one of the problems that both Vicky and myself are probably going to have to deal with after this is that furlough is not a legal concept. So when you're talking about being compliant with the HMRC stuff and the direction that's been issued by the Treasury, people are forgetting about employment law concepts and just kind of going, the government guidance says this shit, but that's not what employment law has said in terms of precedent and the way that you would normally deal with things. So people are kind of throwing the policies out the window and going, we need to do this now because we furloughed people. And that's what's going to cause the issues afterwards, I think, and I'm sure Vicky will back me up on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is, isn't it? You could say, right, well, I got an email from HMRC. Like, well, there's 150 years of case law behind this decision when it gets to court, isn't it? So,
or Martin Lewis tweeted it.
Yes, exactly. He's your favourite person at the moment, isn't he?
My favourite person, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. So, Vicky, what about you?
Gosh, definitely, Helen. I echo where Helen's coming from in that, it's very difficult. It's a change, from a trust and respect and built up relationship. It's much easier to do that on a face-to-face basis. You get more out of them. You can assess their body language better, and it's very difficult to do that in this new concept of Zoom. Not only are we, virtually, not only are we learning that ourselves, we've got to, we've still got to instill that trust and that relationship and build that up as well. So very interesting in terms of some of the things that, and I think, you've covered them, Helen. We're sending a lot more information out via email, looking at ways of protecting that and password protecting that. And some of the other things off the back of this, yes, we've got the furlough piece, but it's the next bit. It's everybody's now starting to get through the shock. We've been in it week 5, haven't we, of furloughing and what that looks like, and that's becoming a bit of a normal word. But the next bit is what next. People are starting to, and the businesses that we support are now looking at the next bit. So how are we going to grow our business? Because actually, when they turn off this the scheme, what next, and how are we going to support people with layoffs and redundancies, and making sure they've got the right policies and processes in place. Because certainly, and I'm sure you may concur, Helen, that a lot of the small businesses out there are now realising they don't necessarily have the right things in their contracts, i.e. short-time working and
layoffs.
And they don't necessarily have a policy on redundancy or a policy on home working or data protection, security, and all these things are now coming to the forefront, and we're supporting many clients with, oh, I don't have that. So some of this is feeling quite reactive, but we're starting to move into a little bit more of a proactive state, because businesses are starting to look about what that looks like. And I suppose the other element as well is not to forget the business as usual, in the start of April, 6th of April, quite a lot of changes it came into play that businesses need to make sure that they comply by. So, for example, terms and conditions, everybody has to have one. It used to be, I think, within 8 weeks of starting. It's now a given that that's a piece of work. We've got minimum wage changes. There's some changes around bereavement leave, parental bereavement leave, and there's other things within that. But equally, we can't forget those pieces in any of the processes and compliance. From an employment law perspective, they seem to be on the wayside. So we're certainly supporting. We've got some webinars to look at how we can support businesses and give them a little bit of a taster of the things that they need to look at and consider, because they need to be making temporary changes to their policies as well. Because as it stands at the minute, they're okay, but actually in this previously they're not now, and they need to make those temporary changes to be able to make sure that they're compliant from an employment law perspective. And whether they stay or not, or whether they're adapted or return, that's just a movable feast right now.
It's like writing your will, isn't it? Everybody always says, oh, it doesn't need to be that thorough, or, we'll just get one off the shelf and do it ourselves, because the worst is probably not going to happen, is it? Although obviously it does with dying, but with this, people have just downloaded an employment contract off the internet and gone ahead. And if this hasn't proved to people that actually you need thoroughly thought out employment contracts and all sorts of contracts done by proper professional HR people, then I don't know what will.
And I know, Helen, you'll echo this. I think I can't stress enough to try and get some advice prior to doing something, because it's not easy to unpick. It can be unpicked, but it's uncomfortable for everybody involved, and can affect the employment relationship between the employer and the employee. So it's better to seek that advice to start with, to be able to. It may not be pleasant, because you still may be looking at short-term redundancies and and ensuring you're compliant with those processes, but you're doing it in the right manner, and supporting your employees, and trying where possible to keep that engagement piece up. But yeah, there's, I think HR, certainly the roles that we're doing, and you included in that, Nick, I think we're quite pivotal in terms of supporting businesses now in this reactive state and going forward as well.
Yes, because obviously the ideal is that you do it. You do all of these things in preparation, and you do them calmly, and you do them, with your employees and with your employer, so that you are making rational decisions that work for everybody. Whereas in the past kind of 3-4 weeks, everybody's just been making panic decisions on the hoof, and that it means you're more likely to experience problems down the line if they've not been kind of thought out properly, doesn't it? Oh, yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. My next question for you all is, what problems, apart, obviously the ones that we've already highlighted, but from your point of view, what are the biggest problems that you think employers or employees might be facing at the moment in terms of the changes that have happened to the world of work? So, Nick, I'm going to come to you again first, please. What do you think from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, in reality, with data protection, people working from home should follow the same processes and procedures that they do in the office. But the biggest problem is that actually working from home creates further problems there. Ideally, an employer should really have, obviously they've got to have a data protection procedure, but I would actually question whether a lot of employers then have written into that or have a separate working from home aspect to their data protection procedure. Because if you've got a firm that there's no working from home at it, then that would have been written into their procedure. So what I would say to employers, is if they have a data protection procedure, and particularly if there's a working from home aspect to it, they should really be letting their employees that are working from home refresh on that and just actually have a read through it, because the employee has a legal responsibility to actually follow any business rules regarding data protection. So that's a really important aspect. Another important aspect of working from home is there's problems in actually, it's a lot harder to trace any data breaches. Now, a data breach is when actually any data that has the ability to identify any living person is breached. It goes to the wrong people, the wrong places. And there should be a data breach procedure written in to their data protection procedures. It's obviously a lot harder to trace that, but it is still a legal requirement for people working at home to report their data breaches. And if you want, I've got about 6 key areas I could go through. If you want me to go through those now, Rachel, is that all right?
Yeah, go.
Okay. As I say, there's some very simple ones, and sometimes you're better off starting off nice and simple because people just aren't really thinking of that. I think one of the things is if you're used to working in the office, there's generally the people who'll put little post-it notes on your computer if you leave it open or anything, or you might actually find you get some bad emails sent. I think at home people think, well, I'm in my home environment, but technically you should still be doing that. If you're away from your computer, you should still be locking it. I know that there's actually probably only family there, but you may still be getting work people into your house if there's certain needs in that way. But even with family there, if you're dealing with sensitive information, if you leave your computer, you should actually be making sure that you shut that down. I think storage is an important aspect. I suppose the big thing is, and it's similar to what I was saying earlier, I work off one computer that has full access to a company's network, whereas my other laptop is my own hard drive. Now, if you have access to a company's network through your computer, that is the best way to work. And what you should be doing is storing documentation through the network rather than onto your hard drive, because it's a lot harder to actually get into that and to hack that. So that's a really important aspect. Most company computers will have 2 types of firewalls. They'll have a firewall which is for the network, and then you'll have your own personal firewall. So it actually has a double barrier there for hackers, etc. Whereas your own personal computer, so if you, for example, are doing a lot of work that you'd normally do work on your work computer, but you're using your own one, you just got to be a bit more careful because you'll probably only have your personal firewall. You also need to make sure you've got antivirus software, and make sure firewalls and your anti-software virus is all up to date. The antivirus software stops things such as malware, which is your viruses, worms, and trojans getting into your system. So that's a really important aspect. Work that you might actually start doing on your home computer, just make sure that you've got those extra bits of security, because your work computer and your network will actually create a lot of that safety. So there's more risk in working on your own laptop than there is actually working on a networked provided computer.
And can I just ask there, Nick, so if we were, because I think I was speaking to somebody the other day, and this wasn't for work, it was for a private thing, but they were saying, I haven't got any antivirus software on my computer as far as I know. So, I mean, if employers are our employees, we provide a laptop so we know what cover they've got. But for businesses who've sent people home and they're working on their own personal laptops, is it the employer's responsibility to ensure that they have some sort of antivirus software, firewall stuff installed on it? Or
yeah, it's a good question, because the employer will always hold that vicarious liability. So if the instruction is that someone's got to go home and they're telling them they'll have to work on their own laptop, then I think there needs to be that mature and sensible conversation between the employee and the employer to say, I need to tell you that actually my firewall's out of date now, or I haven't got this software. And I think they need to have that conversation, because in reality, the employer would hold that vicarious liability and would have to take that responsibility if someone was told you've got to go home and work on your own laptop. Obviously, the best way forward for anyone working at home is to have an employer provided laptop that has all that built in, because that gives the employer the confidence that they're actually using a system that's a lot safer because it's got the right firewall, it's got the right malware protection, etc. But what I would say is if that is the case, you really need to be letting your employer know if you need that help and having that discussion with them. I wouldn't say it's an absolute must that people would do it, but I think that they need to have that mature conversation, and then they need ways of mitigating that risk. It might be that some things that they actually can work on their computer without that is not going to breach data protection. But if they're dealing with sensitive data, then I definitely think that you need those aspects of firewall and antivirus software.
And I suppose from a kind of employer and employee point of view, really, you know, an employer, I couldn't walk into someone's house and ensure they installed antivirus software. But I suppose as long as we could prove that we'd had that conversation and it had been advised, and you know,
and that's the importance of really having those data protection procedures and that working from home aspect, because in reality, it should lay down how you work at home, and it should lay down how you handle that data. So in that procedure, it should actually talk about those aspects of protection to your software, your computer. Yeah. And in reality, if your procedure is saying that, then there is that responsibility that's got to be complied with. And that's why I would say that the provided laptop should have all that in, because you wouldn't have a procedure that you didn't have your equipment to. But if you're actually saying the best we can do here is you've got to use your own, then there is that responsibility then definitely for the employer to support the procedure. And there would definitely be some form of, kickback on that if some data breach was made on somebody's own laptop when the procedure was saying that they needed to have these firewalls and this antivirus protection.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, carry on with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a simple one as well, strong passwords. I mean, you should have good passwords anyway if you work computers. It's recommended that you need a combination of at least 10 lower, upper case letters, numbers, and symbols. So if you are working on your own laptop, make sure you've got a really good password for that. Really sensitive information, it's sometimes good to actually put a secondary a two-factor authentication on it, really. So what that means is we'll all log into our computer, but we'll all know that some data is sometimes sent where there's a password that you've got to actually access and open that sensitive data. So that's always one that's a good one to do if you've got really sensitive data, is to put a secondary password onto that.
And you can get that from Google, can't you? Google do a two-step authentication app.
Yeah.
There's loads of them about. It's easy. It's not an expensive thing.
It's not rocket science, and in reality, you can. A lot of work networks already have that system in place, and I often get spreadsheets sent to me where I've been sent the access code separately, and therefore I've got that, and then send the data, and then you can actually then log into it. Encryption is a really important aspect. What encryption does is it actually puts your documentation that you send or your messaging into a code, really, and it's called ciphertext. So what it actually means is that if your computer is hacked, all they'll see is this ciphertext code. Whereas if you've got the encryption key within your system, that data will come out in plain text to you. So it's always best to send any sensitive information through an encrypted system. Most company networks do send their stuff through encrypted systems, but again, it gets back to that question you asked. It was a pertinent one about what do your procedures say, because if you're being asked to work from your home computer, you may not have that encrypted capability. And if it's saying that all documentation needs to be sent under encryption, then again, you need to be speaking to your employer as to how you can actually ensure that you get that encryption. I mean, you can actually, on Windows laptops, there's a thing called BitLocker, 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 and that will allow you to encrypt both your sensitive data and your computer. So that's worth looking at as well. Another couple would probably deal a lot more in hard copies as well. You might be getting something called letters again. And obviously, if you're dealing with letters, Be aware not to leave them hanging around, and also anything you might be printing off and working from, you should be dealing with it the same way you would as it's in the office, and that is it should be stored in a locked drawer when you're not using it. And if you do have it's a really important thing to have, and a lot of people don't. But those that are regularly working from home, generally people have shredders, just the little office. You don't have the big ones that we have in the offices. But a lot of people for the first time, and it may well be that you need a way. And I'm not saying to people go out there and buy shredders, but it might well be that if we're long term in lockdown and working from home, that actually employers and companies support people working from home with actually, obviously getting that important bit of kit, which is a shredder, to make sure we're getting rid of sensitive information. And last but not least, we're going to be making a lot of phone calls in our own home environment. And it is important that if you are talking about sensitive information, that you just make sure you're in a private room. It's so easy just to set the laptop up in the kitchen, and then you've got the kids, family walking through, etc. That's fine if you're just doing day-to-day work, but if you are dealing with more sensitive data and aspects, then it really is important that you maybe put yourself away somewhere and deal with those calls in private. Those are sort of the key ones really to comply with.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there, Nick. I think one of the things, because we were talking briefly just before we came on, because obviously Vicky's got her kids. My child is running around in and out of the door here. It is really easy to forget that they're there and that they'll see things. I did it the other day. I printed off something. It wasn't a sensitive document, but I printed it off and forgotten. I printed it and left it on the printer, and Leon came down and brought it to me. Now, if it had been something sensitive, that's inappropriate. He's 10, so he can read and fairly well understand things. For toddlers, it's different. But it is something you don't think about, isn't it? Like, say, if you were in the office, if you were in a shared office, you'd lock them away, you'd close your laptop, you'd put it in the safe, whatever. Whereas here, because you think, we're just at home, you do leave things lying around a lot more, don't you? So it's
and normally work from home, your children wouldn't generally be with you, would they? It's we've got this whole different scenario of people doing homeschooling at the same time as trying to do work.
It's interesting.
It is, yeah. It's a completely different.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Nick, and some really good points there. From my perspective, I would also echo those in that there are some key policies right now, and Helen, please chip in if you need me, that businesses do need to look at to stay compliant from an employment law perspective, really, and best practice perspective. And some of those policies that they would definitely need to look at would be around the data protection, the home working, loan working, which fits in with everything that Nick's been talking about, which is whoever is the data protection officer now needs to be looking and revising those policies, whether that's a temporary change or a permanent change. Certainly something that needs to be reviewed. But from a people employment law perspective, certainly be having a look at your redundancy policy, and if you've not got one, get one in place, which will include the furlough piece as well. But ultimately as well, check where you are with layoff and short term, because I do feel that we are going to see a bit of a wave of this. And you're nodding, Helen. Once we come through this and there's a decision about, I know furlough, the job retention scheme has been extended, but what next? What does that look like? And we need to do a bit of future planning here and get employers, small businesses protected, because ultimately, if we don't manage this, it could impact them in the future, like you've mentioned before, Rachel, with employment law tribunals, etc. The right time now is to look at some of these policies, which would definitely be redundancy, would need one. Home working, loan working, because there's also that health and safety aspect from a compliance, which is, we have a duty of care to our employees as well in terms of workstation and what that looks like. So all those do need to be, anything that impacts the employer from that perspective, from a compliance perspective, needs to be reviewed. And whether that's a temporary change or a permanent change, then that's certainly something that needs to be considered. Even such things as, flexible working. So it's also about what time people are logging on, logging off. It's fun. I've got 2 small children at home, 6 and 7, who are currently raiding the fridge and eating ice cream because they know I can't get to them. But Thank you. But it's also about, those flexible arrangements. At what point you do arrange to have those complex meetings, to your point, Nick, before, or confidential meetings from a professional perspective. It's about keeping that the employer and the employee safe in the work that they're working on, and ultimately from a professional perspective as well for clients. And I know, Helen, you'll agree, and Nick, we do have that we're in a situation where, my employer is fantastic and being flexible, but I also need to make sure that I'm having the conversations at the right time in the right place. And if it's something that is very serious, that, I've got a childcare provision in place, which is my husband.
I think that people don't think about at this time is, as an employer, you have a responsibility to your employees. Little things like, well, Chloe for us, well, it's not even a little thing, it's quite a big thing. She messaged and said her back was really sore because she's been sat on her dining room chair for ages trying to do work. This was before she was furloughed. And so we went and got her chair from the office and took that. Well, actually, she went and got her chair from the office and took it down. But it's making, those same things that apply in the office, is your laptop at the right height? Have you got a proper mouse? And, if you would prefer to wear that, have you got a wrist rest? All of those things still apply in the home.
Yeah. Sorry, that's that self-assessment piece. So very much now, as part of that home working or loan working, it is about protecting the employee, because this is where I'm sure Helen would agree. We may start to creep and see people starting to look at claiming things around back injuries, disability discrimination, all those things that go with it. Work's caused work injuries because of. So it's really, really important, and these are only small things and small changes to get the right support and advice now to prevent anything more significant in the future.
And that is a self-assessment. Yeah, go on, Helen.
I was just going to jump on the back of some of the stuff that Vicky's been saying there, in terms of now more than ever, it's really important to keep audit trails of what you're doing and why you're making decisions, because everything changes so much in terms of the guidance and the different directive that's being given to us. And the fact that this doesn't marry up with employment law, that when we do get to the point where we're having employment tribunal claims about why did I get furloughed and she didn't, why did he get furloughed, and why can't I be furloughed, you need to have a really clear audit process to demonstrate why you're making the decision, what you're taking into consideration. I know it's not governed by redundancy law in terms of selection criteria, but you probably are going to have to demonstrate why did you furlough employee A and not employee B, why did you bring the employee C back before employee D, and all of those things. And also, if you are remaining open and you're expecting people to come into a work environment, the first claim that you're probably going to get is, was this a detriment to health and safety? Have you breached my health and safety? So making sure that you're auditing and kind of documenting all of the things that you've done to protect things like social distancing and that kind of stuff, it's going to be really important. And also, again, jumping on the back of some of the stuff that Vicky was saying, working from home and managing children and managing school work. How are you then assessing whether people are complying with a contractual obligation to do the work that you're expecting them to do? What are your expectations, and are you communicating them properly to people? So are you happy for them to possibly work 20% less than they do when they're in the office environment, because they've got these other distractions that they wouldn't normally have to deal with? Or is that going to cause you a massive issue for your business? And how are you going to manage that if those things do come up? So going back to things like performance management, disciplinary and grievance, and all of these policies that will still apply, just because we're working from home or we're working in a different way, doesn't mean that your normal policies don't apply.
It's a key point. That is one of the things I wanted to mention, because I was listening to Women's Hour, which I do quite often, but they were talking then about, now we've got situations where men and women are working from home, and I don't want this to get into a feminist argument at all, but the women are still ending up doing the childcare and the job, and the men are just putting themselves, generally speaking, in an office and getting on with doing the job. I know a few people personally that isn't the case, the man and the woman, whereas the woman would even have been on maternity leave, but now that the man's at home, he's having to do childcare, quite rightly so. And so it is, it's not just your employees are working from home. Your employees are working from home with all these additional pressures. There's other adults in the house, there's teenagers in the house, there's toddlers in the house. You might even have kind of elderly relatives that have come to stay because they're not managing themselves at home. All sorts of different scenarios that it wouldn't necessarily have been before. And it is, as an employer, I suppose you've got to be flexible in how you're looking at that. But by the same, there's all that was that pull and push between what your employer needs and what you as an what your employee needs and what you as an employer need that employee to be doing. And that's where the tricky situation is.
The mental health piece comes into that though as well, and I know Helen will agree that, you know, under that health and safety, you know, not only from a disability discrimination perspective, but anybody that does have any mental health concern, but equally from a health and safety perspective, you know, this is about the pressure, the stress, the strain, that managing the work-life balance, people working longer hours at home because they feel that, you know, they're breaking off a little bit more in the day to do, you know, the tasks of looking after children or whatever that might be. You know, so one, certainly from a duty of care perspective, we also have a duty of care from a well-being, and as a business we support, you know, I'm a mental health first aid instructor for youth, and I do think that's certainly something off the back of this that will be needed, because if we're struggling mentally at times in this challenging situation, I can't, you know, what our children are thinking and feeling and things. So I do think from, you know, I know we're talking about compliance but for me there's a link certainly to mental well-being in that, and that we've got to be seen, and that's about the support that we put in place to support not only the people that before this pandemic started needed some more support mentally because of their you know, their mental health well-being, but everybody else now. I think everybody, you know, I don't think there's one person that I've spoke to that has not struggled at some point. He's on a journey of what heck's going on in this crazy world, to a little bit of an acceptance, to now thinking, okay, I can start to think a little bit more forward. But certainly from a duty of care perspective, we've got to be looking after our mental well-being of our employees.
Yes, absolutely. And I that how, I mean, in terms of sort of, you know, again, employees and that employer-employee relationship, I'm presuming that, as Helen was saying before, the main thing is going to be, first of all, have those conversations. So don't just impose things and don't just say, this is, you know, this is what we're doing, but have those conversations and try and have a dialogue with your staff to say, this is what I want, this is what I need. Or, you know, if you're an employee, talk to your employer and say, this is my position, you know, how are we going to accommodate it? But then the second step of that is documenting that that's the conversation you've had, or that's the process you followed, in case you do ever end up further down the line, because it's kind of like you say, future proofing because if we don't know what's happened over the last 3 weeks, we're certainly not going to know what's going to be happening over the next kind of 3 months, are we? So it's just sort of protecting yourself as business owners and employees as best you possibly can, really, isn't it?
I think the early indications are that the HMRC are going to be pretty rigorous with auditing this after the event. I mean, we're spending taxpayers' money here on things like furlough. And I've got clients of my own who I know full well and they're not compliant with what the HMRC and the direction's saying, because they're furlough people and they're asking them to work.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, it's obviously from a compliance point of view for myself, I've got to make it bloody sure that I've got in writing that I've advised them otherwise. But I know they're asking people to work, and that's causing a level of anxiety for the employee, as well as the, you know, potentially risking a claim of, you know, a prosecution for fraudulent claims in the longer term. But then the employees are thinking, well, am I going to have to pay this money back that I've received? You know, it's just creating another layer of anxiety and stress on top of everything else that's already going on, really. So you know, just being aware that if you're furloughing staff, well, fine, but you know, think about what the scheme's called. It's a job retention scheme. It's to avoid making people redundant. So it's when work available, so don't furlough them and then expect them to do the job because they're getting 80% of the pay, because that's just not going to cut it when the HMRC come around.
Off the back of that, Helen, I found a couple of businesses that are using furlough as a bit of a stick. So if you don't perform,
I'm going to furlough you.
And albeit that's not necessarily a compliance issue, that's still from a mental well-being perspective. Whereas if, you know, we're starting to, you know, it's got to be used in the right way. This is something to protect the business, to protect the employees within their role and continue, you know, the economy after this event. But I certainly, and this is about engagement of staff more than using it as a stick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting people sort of coming in and saying, well, I might as well furlough them because they're not performing anyway. Well, what were you doing to deal with the fact that they weren't performing anyway in the first place? You know, you've got processes in place. Why haven't you followed them? Don't use furlough as a kind of penalty for somebody because they're not performing. Manage the fact that they're not performing.
I think that's certainly another risk, isn't it? That people use the situation now as an excuse, or even that the situation now uncovers kind of gaping holes that were there in the first place. Like you said at the beginning, where people are realising that their policies might not be up to date. But as Nick was saying, if people are realising actually we've got employees working on personal computers, we've got people's data all over we're sending it willy-nilly, it's not stored securely, it's really opening up all of these kind of cans of worms that people for ages have been pushing under the carpet, and it'll be all right, never happens, and now everybody's a bit panicking.
That's another thing that's going to come out of some of the issues, because if you're furloughing, if you're a small business and you've got 5 staff and you furlough them and you as the director then take on the tasks of those 5 people, it's quite likely you're going to uncover something that they're not doing, or they're doing wrong, or they shouldn't have been doing. And then how do you then go about addressing that when, from a disciplinary point of view, when you've got them on furlough leave and you can't ask them to do work-related stuff? So it's from a balancing that, and whether do you bring them back in order to then discipline them to then furlough them again, or do you just is it urgent and can it wait? All of these things, and it's fairly difficult for employers to manage this, really. So I think
I think there's another thing, and it might even have been you that was telling me this story, Helen, but somebody was saying that they had a finance director, and they furloughed the finance director, and they've now realised that what the hell has this finance director, no, it wasn't you, I remember who I was talking to, what the hell has this finance director been doing, because I'm actually managing to do all of their work and my work quite easily. And I think that's another risk as well that people haven't foreseen, isn't it? That they might suddenly realise, actually, why have we got 20 people when 5 people are doing the work quite easily? Yeah, it is. I'm going to move the conversation on, because I thank you for those. There were really good tips and contributions there, but I'm conscious of the time. There's one last thing that I really wanted to ask about, and that is, where can people go to find help at the moment? What is there out there to help? So, and I'm thinking here in terms of services that your companies provide, but also at the moment, loads of businesses have got discounted products, services, courses that they're offering. Are there any webinars, websites, anything that you found that might be particularly helpful to people? And are there any tools and platforms that I know Nick mentioned a bit like by Windows, but anything else? So I'll go around again. Nick, I'll come to you first, please. Is there anything you've found that might help people?
In reality, I think the first thing that needs to be doing is it'd be a shame if they furloughed their data protection officers in a company. In reality, as both Vicky and Helen have said, it really is important to go back and just relook at those documentation and make sure the procedures in place. And actually, it is the time to make sure, or rewrite, or even write for the first time, those data protection procedures, because it's protecting both the employer and the employee whilst working at home, because it gives those really nice structured guidelines so people actually do understand what they're meant to be doing, how they're dealing with data, and what their working practices should be. So that's really important. Obviously, I'm freelance consultant, and I'm always available if people should want me to review their procedures and even write up their procedures. So that's obviously help that I can provide. So those are the 2 big ones for me, really. There's plenty out there. I mean, the government website on GDPR really will cover all aspects, and it covered working from home in there when it was initially came out in 2018. So there are some pointers in there that people can pick up on. But the big one is making sure you've got your procedures in place, that your employees fully understand them, and because a lot of these procedures, they get written and then they just gather virtual dust in a folder somewhere on their network drive. And it is important that people actually, if they've access to them through the network, they should just go in, drop in there, have a quick read of all the procedures, and make sure that they're complying with them. Because if you're at home and there's a procedure written that you're expected to have read, and you don't comply with something in there and there's a data breach, then you hold the liability for that data breach more than you would if it was sort of accidental and you were trying to actually obey the sort of procedures and do things right.
I think that's a really important point as well, because I know, personally, when GDPR came out, for example, that was a dirty word for about 2 months, wasn't it? Whenever you mentioned GDPR,
it's our money, but there you go.
But you see, I think a lot of people were guilty of, we got ourselves and our businesses ready for GDPR. We did everything we needed to do, and then we forgot all about it. We were like, oh, thank goodness that's over with. And actually, it's not. It's, these are ongoing things that we need to be looking at and thinking about. And I think you're right. Like you say, the government website, particularly on GDPR, is good and has a lot of basic info on there that you can just go and refresh yourself on what you should be doing as a business. And like you say, yes, refresh yourself on your own personal policies, but just keep going back and checking it, because it's really easy to forget about it and think that you've done it, and actually you've slipped back into old habits and you're not GDPR compliant anymore. So that's a good one. Thank you. Helen, what about you?
Probably similar, really. I mean, other than our own website, which is www.facetofacehr.com, where we've got a really good corona advice resource on there that's all free. The government website is probably the best place to go for both employers and employees. And as much as I've been frustrated, I'm sure Vicky has too, in terms of the amount of changes that have happened recently, they're doing an absolutely sterling job at keeping it up to date and keeping it relevant and keeping it in language that's actually pretty easy to understand for both employers and employees. So I think that's probably the best place to go, because I think you could start looking at ACAS and look at other stuff, Citizens Advice Bureau and all that. But there have been some contradictions with the government guidance on both of those forums, even in terms of looking at things like HMRC's Twitter feed. They've been in kind of conflict with what the actual guidance says on the government website. And I can only say that if HMRC do end up coming and auditing you, they're going to audit you against what's on the government website. And there's a clear timeline on there in terms of summary of changes. So if you can say I did that on that time, on that date, and that's the reason I made that decision, and that matches their timeline in terms of updates and changes, and that's much more applicable and easy to defend than if you've looked at HMRC. John Smith has replied to you as a customer service agent on HMRC on Twitter at some point in the middle of the night when you've thought of a question. So I think, just being that, I would direct most people to the government website, really.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And what about you, Vicky?
Yeah, so very similar to Helen. On our website, though, so we're obviously on most social media platforms, so Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but we've developed some short webinars which split down quite a lot of the changes from a government perspective. So link very much to the government website, but just some hints and tips, really. We've also put some stuff on there about helping businesses understand how they can claim for business grants and business loans, the types of things to look out for mental health. So there's a really good plethora of blogs and webinars to have a look at. So certainly I would advise people to go and do that. It's obviously all free, and we'll continue, very much like Helen's mentioned, to decipher what comes from HMRC and the government. We'll go on the weekend and then speak out again on Monday, so that it's in a format that hopefully business owners can understand. What we are also doing as well, and this is just, this is about COVID and the pandemic, but other people issues and as well. But we offer a 30-minute free HR consultation, which helps people get as much information as they can, and really helps us drill down on what it is they need. But this, we're going into a stage now where this is about supporting businesses, future planning, looking at their resource, their workforce planning. So yeah, have a look at our website. Obviously contact me, and I know Rachel said you put the details up after. But yeah, it's a very active, busy world, and it's still a very much a movable feast.
And just from a personal point of view, I follow both of you in terms of blogs and your websites and your email newsletters, and the content that both companies are producing has been phenomenal in terms of keeping on top of the changes and the recommendations that come out, but interpreting it as well for business owners. Because sometimes, you get those emails from HMRC saying, I don't know what applies to me and what doesn't. Whereas both of your email newsletters have been really helpful. So I recommend anybody who is unsure on the whole HR thing, sign up to Optimal People Business and Face-to-Face HR email newsletters, because they're really, really helpful. That's really good. Thank you. So we are coming up to the end of time. So I'm going to just do one last and say, is there anything that you think people need to know that you've forgotten, and what would be your one top tip to say to people for like this afternoon? If you do nothing else about this, what's the one thing you recommend people go and do? So, Vicky, I'll come to you first, please.
Yes, please, because I can hear my little monsters in the background getting slightly restless. I would just say, to keep up to date, find somebody that you feel that you can understand their language, how and that it fits with your business model. That's why we're giving HR advice out, and hopefully, we can support businesses, existing and new clients going forward. But have a look at the website, and any questions, then obviously let me know.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. What about you?
I'd just say don't rush into decisions like furlough and those kind of things. Take some advice first, whether that's for something like me or Vicky or whoever. Once you make that decision, you stuck with it for 3 weeks at least. So don't rush into the decisions before you kind of go and explore whether that's the right thing for you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Helen. And Nick?
Just to summarise, obviously, data protection is a legal requirement. I would say one of the biggest concerns would be anybody that's working from home on their own laptop, and we've spoken about that to make sure the procedure's in place. But my top tip, which is a really simple one, is I would say the majority of data breaches are where data is sent to the wrong people. And what I mean by that, we've all been speaking about the fact that there's all these distractions we're getting at home. In the office, you're a lot more focused, but at home, there's a lot more distractions. And because of that, and this is a simple tip, I would always say, double check who you're sending the data to, and then also double check that the data is the right data. Because I've seen that actually people have put in on, when you put the first few letters of a surname in, it brings up, and we've all received other people's information. When I was in the police, we had a deputy chief constable called Peter Walker, and I had a friend who was a detective constable called Peter Walker, and he kept getting the deputy chief constable's sensitive emails. So that's because people weren't, checking the email addresses. So make sure you're sending it to the right people. And then as well, there's often a case that you think you've picked up the right piece of data to attach. And, if you do something as to send out all your clients' information and data, you've got quite a serious data breach. So that's the simple top tip, is with so many more distractions at home. So whenever you're sending data, always double check you're sending it to the right people, and double check that data, open it and recheck it through. And that one alone will save so many data breaches.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. You're right. We do it all the time. I'm forever doing it with my WhatsApp messages. I'll put like, "What are you wearing tonight?" or something to my godson, meaning to whatever. Done that times. But yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you. I think from my point of view, what my recommendation would be is very similar to what's already been said. Is speak to somebody who knows what they're talking about. It is really easy, especially with all the stresses and everything that's going on at the moment, to get kind of stuck in your own head, to keep going over and over the same problem, going around it. And, should I do it this way, or should I do it that way, or have I done this, or whatever? Just talk to somebody. There's so many amazing professionals out there at the moment who are offering, like I said, free consultation, or are just happy to have a quick email or a 5-minute chat just to point you in the right direction or give you a little bit of advice. And GrowTraffic are one of them here. So, if you want to drop me an email at rw@growtraffic.co.uk, comment on the post below. We will do our best to either, as I say, point you in the right direction or answer any queries that you have. So don't kind of sit there panicking or struggling. Please just ask for help. And on that note, we are out of time. So thank you so much to all three of you. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I hope some people have found this useful. And, let's all carry on trying to be compliant. And for now, we're all going to go out into the sunshine because it's a lovely day. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.